Guys, you know those old videos filmed in the last century. You've definitely come across them on YouTube. They restore them, colorize them, and publish them. These clips were shot all around the world. They give us a window into the lives of people from those times. Now, while watching these videos, is there something that catches your attention? Look a little more carefully. Look at how people were dressed. Whenever I watch these clips, this question inevitably comes to mind. Why do these people look more elegant? Why do they look cooler? Look at the suits they're wearing, the long coats. They look like they stepped right out of an Italian mafia movie. They look so serious and so powerful that you almost want to take your hat off. Or maybe put a hat on? So, what changed? If it's a style we admire and find so appealing, why did it start to disappear? I started chasing this question. But first, let's see how accurate this assumption really is. Watching a few old movies and making assumptions might be a bit hasty. Maybe not everyone was that stylish, most likely not. Or we can consider the camera factor. After all, back then, photography wasn't nearly as common. People weren't pulling their phones out of their pockets and randomly taking photos like they do today. Naturally, they might have been more careful when standing in front of a camera. That's why we mostly see the good-looking moments. Selective perception, right? Sure, maybe. But still, look at these people. They're just walking down the street. Maybe they're going to work, maybe to the market. They don't look like they dressed up for something special. It's as if dressing like that was part of their daily lives. And I think it really was. Because back then, dressing that way in public was an extension of social culture. It was a matter of social status. Being a polite lady or gentleman was important, and clothing was its outward reflection. Also, people didn't own many clothes back then. They bought very little and used what they had carefully for years. They spent a significant portion of their income on clothing. As you can see in this graph, the share of our budget allocated to clothing has steadily decreased over the years. We started choosing more comfortable, more practical items. Like t-shirts, worn out? Throw it away and buy a new one cheaply. We became a consumer society, and that's not sustainable at all. So even though we still find those old styles attractive, how did such a transition happen? There are many reasons, of course, but there's one reason I'm sure most of you haven't thought about. Our story begins in the 1700s. The King of Spain gives a Dutch explorer 2 male and 4 female sheep as a gift. Then these 6 sheep are transported to South Africa. Over time, when their number reaches 26, the explorer passes away. Since his wife takes care of the flock, she sells the sheep to a British settler in Australia. So the sheep literally go on a world tour. And we owe that cool-looking clothing style to these world-traveling sheep. We owed it to them because those sheep also played a role in the disappearance of that style. Do you know why? It's all about the fabric. Fabrics are measured by grams per square meter and classified according to their weight. Today, 135 grams per square meter and below is extra light. 135 to 200 grams per square meter light, 200 to 270 grams per square meter medium, 270 to 340 grams per square meter heavy, and 340 to 400 grams per square meter extra heavy. Or rather, this is how they're classified today. If we went back to the days of traditional tailoring, that extra heavy 400 grams per square meter limit would be considered the lightest value. Around 470 would be mid-range, and 530 and above would be heavy class. And here lies the reason behind that distinctive cool appearance. The weight of the fabric used. But that's not all. When you look back, you'll notice that jackets were thicker and stiffer. The real issue isn't the thickness, it's the weight. They sat on your body like a mold. Back then, men generally wore around 470 grams per square meter fabrics for suits. And for long coats, they preferred fabrics that went up to 800 grams per square meter. Of course, they probably weren't even aware of the value of what they were wearing. But when they tried it on, they felt the difference. Some winter coats went up to 1,000 grams per square meter. Today, the average winter coat is around 300 grams per square meter. Much lighter than before, Yes, of course, that makes it comfortable. So, did we give up that style just for comfort? Before a garment reaches us, there are four important stages: harvesting wool from animals, turning that wool into yarn, producing fabric from the yarn, and finally producing clothing from the fabric. Tailoring. Those sheep acquired by the British settler turned Australia into a multi-billion-dollar industry in the first stage of this process: wool production. But Australia didn't process the wool itself. It was generally sent to England, to Yorkshire. The wool was turned into yarn in Huddersfield and wound onto spools. At this stage, there's also a unit of measurement: how many spools of yarn come from the wool. The more spools produced, the finer the individual fibers, and therefore the softer they feel. For a long time, wool that produced 60 spools was considered the best wool on the market. That's why they were called 60s, not the 1960s. 60 spools. Back then, farmers had a big goal: increasing the spool count. They even began breeding sheep accordingly, and they succeeded. Thus, the 70s and 80s were born. But their goal was even bigger: reaching the hundreds. And this was finally achieved in 1960 by two companies. Of course, two British companies. Since the wool was processed there, it makes sense that such a breakthrough came from there. This event, in reaching the hundreds, was a historic moment for the textile industry. Sales exploded in many parts of the world, especially in Japan and Italy. Italy? Could this have something to do with the jackets we see in Italian mafia movies? Anyway, the hundreds were given a very special name. Very creatively, they called them Super 100S. With this, especially Italian brands began producing much lighter, much softer, much silkier fabrics. Meanwhile, with technological advancements, central heating systems became widespread, and people's need to wear very warm clothing indoors began to decrease. And suddenly, demand for these lighter fabrics increased. Right here, one of the details that once looked so good to our eyes began to disappear. Layering. Normally, when you wear just one item, no matter how good it is, it may not look that aesthetically pleasing. But when you wear a shirt like this and a jacket over it, suddenly you're perceived as more elegant. In fact, that's exactly why experts and fashion designers throughout argue that jacket fronts should always be left open, so the inner layers remain visible. That's how I prefer it too. When central heating reduced the need for layering, we started looking less elegant. Put on a t-shirt, turn on the camera, become a YouTuber. But there's another problem. Clothes made from these lighter fabrics don't fit the body as well as the others. Look at how this one fits. Now look at this one. Light fabrics easily show even the smallest flaws. They can quickly slide off one shoulder and create an unbalanced appearance. On the other hand, a heavy garment doesn't shift so easily, or light fabrics wrinkle more easily, like the fabric Trump is wearing here. But for example, we don't see this in linen suits because instead of wrinkling, they bend and fold. Does it have to be this way? Of course not, because there's a final step: tailoring. For these light fabrics to look good, they need tailoring. And tailoring light fabric is a bit more difficult than the others. Behind the very stylish suits we see today, there is actually very delicate craftsmanship. For example, it's said that in a good suit there should be no gap between the collar and the back of the neck. Likewise, when the arms are raised, the collar should not separate from the neck. However, in machine-produced lightweight fabrics, avoiding this is very difficult. It needs to be adjusted to you, and that requires tailoring. But mechanization and automation have reduced the tailoring profession to the brink of extinction. Once a common profession you could encounter everywhere, it has now turned into a craft, and it all started with those 6 sheep given as a gift. Just kidding. Let's not make them the scapegoat. They're very cute animals. The expansion of industry, technological progress, changing social dynamics, all of these brought us to this point. Just like with many other products, in order to keep up with society's growing demands, we compromised on quality. We buy cheap, throw it away when it wears out, and chase the next new thing. Yet today, sustainability has become one of the concepts we value most. There are even YouTubers explaining how old clothing styles were more effective in this regard. So why can't we still do it? Of course, I'm not saying we should completely return to the past. The styles we have today are also part of our identity. But doesn't it tell you something that for the most elegant outfits instead of ready to wear, we have to go to the tailors we practically eliminated? Undoubtedly, with all these developments, our lives have become much better. While we can buy more functional clothes at lower prices, our clothing expenses have also decreased. But if dressing stylishly has become easier, why did this happen? Shouldn't it have become easier to dress more elegantly as things got cheaper? That's why sometimes I wonder, did we make all these advancements by giving up some of our values? In this fast consumption era, while longing for the elegance and care of the past, maybe we've reached a point where the fast-paced modern lifestyle has pushed aesthetics and style into the background. And I fear that clothing is just the front of this change. What else are we giving up inside ourselves? If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. See you.